Have you ever thought about why the same action produces completely different results depending on when you take it? Why does one entrepreneur launch a product at exactly the right moment and become a billionaire, while another launches an identical product 6 months later and fails completely? Why does the same joke told at different moments either kill or bomb? Why can the same strategic move either make you or destroy you based purely on timing? This video will change how you see opportunity, patience, and the invisible rhythms that determine whether your actions succeed or fail. Today we're diving into Law 35 from the 48 Laws of Power, Master the Art of Timing. But this isn't just about patience or waiting for the right moment. This is about understanding one of the most sophisticated principles of power, that timing isn't just about when you act, it's about reading the deeper patterns, rhythms, and cycles that govern all human systems. Most people focus obsessively on what to do and how to do it. Masters focus on when to do it, because timing determines everything. Let me tell you a story that will make everything clear. In the spring of 1861, Otto von Bismarck was appointed Minister-President of Prussia. His goal was audacious: unify the fractured German states into a single empire under Prussian leadership. This goal had defeated better men. The obstacles were enormous. Austria dominated the German Confederation. France opposed any strong Germany. The German states themselves were jealous of their independence. Most observers thought unification was impossible. Bismarck looked at this landscape and saw something others missed. He saw timing opportunities. He understood that political situations have rhythms, that conflicts have moments when they're ripe for exploitation, that public opinion has windows when it can be moved. He didn't rush. He waited and watched for 3 years, building military strength, establishing diplomatic positions, but taking no decisive action. Then in 1864, a minor dispute arose over 2 provinces, Schleswig and Holstein. Most politicians saw this as a trivial border disagreement. Bismarck saw perfect timing. The dispute was complex enough that he could manipulate it. Austria was strong enough to defeat Denmark but weak enough to be vulnerable afterwards. Public opinion in Prussia was hungry for military success after decades of humiliation. The great powers were distracted by other concerns. Every factor aligned. Bismarck struck. He allied with Austria to defeat Denmark, securing the provinces. Then, at exactly the right moment 2 years later when Austria was isolated diplomatically and Prussia's military advantage was maximum, he manufactured a conflict over administration of those same provinces. The 7 Weeks' War destroyed Austrian dominance of Germany. Bismarck had removed the first obstacle through perfect timing. 4 years later, another moment arrived. France under Napoleon III was weakening domestically and diplomatically. The southern German states were moving toward Prussia but needed a catalyst. Spanish succession created a diplomatic crisis that Bismarck carefully escalated. France declared war on Prussia, appearing as the aggressor. The southern German states joined Prussia out of German nationalism against foreign threat. The Franco-Prussian War ended in complete Prussian victory. In 1871, less than a decade after Bismarck took power, the German Empire was proclaimed. Every major obstacle had been removed. Not through superior force alone, but through absolutely perfect timing. Bismarck struck when conditions were optimal, creating an empire that lasted until 1918. This wasn't luck. This was mastery of timing. Bismarck understood that political conditions flow like tides. There are moments when actions that would fail at other times suddenly become possible. There are windows when opponents are vulnerable, allies are receptive, public opinion is movable, and consequences are manageable. Miss the window, and the opportunity vanishes, often forever. Catch the window perfectly, and impossible things become inevitable. Now let me take you back 2 million years to understand why timing is so crucial and why most humans are terrible at it. Our ancestors evolved in environments with relatively simple, predictable timing requirements. Hunt when animals are active. Gather when plants are ripe. Seek shelter when weather threatens. These timing decisions operated on cycles you could perceive directly. Day and night. Seasons. Weather patterns. Your senses could tell you when conditions were right. Natural selection optimized us for responding to immediate, perceptible conditions. It did not optimize us for reading complex, multi-layered timing patterns in social and political systems. When you're deciding whether to challenge the tribal leader, the timing depends on factors you can't directly perceive: the leader's current support level, the tribe's satisfaction, potential allies' readiness, external threats that might make leadership change dangerous. These factors operate on rhythms that aren't visible. Modern life is entirely composed of these invisible rhythms. Markets have cycles of boom and bust. Organizations have periods of stability and upheaval. Relationships have phases of connection and distance. Industries have moments of disruption and consolidation. Careers have windows of opportunity and periods of constraint. None of these rhythms are directly perceptible. You must learn to read them through indirect signals, through pattern recognition, through understanding the underlying forces that drive the cycles. Your brain is running software designed for simple, perceptible timing in a world of complex, invisible timing. This mismatch is why most people's timing is terrible. They act based on immediate conditions without understanding the deeper patterns. They see surface stability and don't notice underlying instability approaching. They see surface chaos and don't recognize that order is emerging. They act at exactly the wrong moment because they can't read the rhythms. Mastering Law 35 means developing the ability to perceive these invisible rhythms. To sense when systems are reaching transition points. To recognize when conditions are shifting in ways that will create or destroy opportunities. To wait patiently through unfavorable conditions and strike decisively when conditions align. This is extraordinarily difficult because it requires overriding all your instincts for immediate action. Now let me show you how timing operates in business, because this is where fortunes are made and lost based purely on when you act. Consider the history of social networks. In the early 2000s, dozens of social networking sites launched. Friendster, MySpace, Orkut, dozens of others. Most failed or faded. Then Facebook launched in 2004 and became dominant. Why? The conventional explanation focuses on execution. Facebook had better features, better design, better leadership. This is partly true but misses the crucial factor: timing. Facebook launched at exactly the moment when several factors aligned. Broadband internet was widespread enough to support rich social experiences but not universal, creating growth runway. Digital photography was common enough that photo sharing was natural but still novel enough to be exciting. College students, Facebook's initial market, were reaching critical mass online but weren't yet saturated with social platforms. Zuckerberg didn't create these conditions. He recognized them and acted at exactly the right moment. 6 months earlier, some factors weren't ready. 6 months later, the market would have been more crowded. The window was narrow, and Facebook entered at the optimal moment. This timing multiplied the value of every good decision that followed. Compare this to Google+, launched in 2011. Google had more resources, more talent, better technology than Facebook did in 2004. But the timing was wrong. Social networks were already entrenched. Switching costs were high. The novelty had worn off. Network effects favored incumbents. Same basic product category, vastly superior resources, completely different outcome. The difference was timing. This pattern repeats constantly in business. The entrepreneur who launches during a boom gets funding easily and grows rapidly but might be destroyed when the cycle turns. The entrepreneur who launches during a bust struggles initially but has no competition and is positioned perfectly for the recovery. Neither strategy is inherently better. The question is whether you understand the cycle you're entering and time your moves accordingly. Sophisticated operators don't just respond to timing. They create timing. They manipulate conditions to make moments more favorable for their actions. Think about how this works in corporate politics. You want to launch an initiative that will face resistance. You don't just announce it. You wait for or create a crisis that makes your initiative seem like the obvious solution. You don't act when the organization is stable and resistant to change. You wait for instability that creates openness to new approaches. This is advanced timing mastery. Not just reading rhythms but influencing them. Not just waiting for the right moment but creating the right moment through carefully sequenced actions that shift conditions in your favor. Bismarck didn't just wait for disputes to arise. He manufactured them at moments when they would produce the outcomes he wanted. He created his own timing. Now here's where this gets really dark, and I need you to pay close attention because this is the twist that changes everything. Perfect timing can make terrible strategies succeed and poor timing can make brilliant strategies fail. This means outcomes are often determined more by timing than by strategy quality. But we don't see this. We attribute outcomes to strategy because timing is invisible. So we learn the wrong lessons. Think about tech startups during the dot-com boom of the late 90s. Companies with absurd business models, no path to profitability, and incompetent leadership raised hundreds of millions and went public at billion-dollar valuations. Their strategies were terrible. Their timing was perfect. They caught a moment of irrational exuberance when capital was infinite and skepticism was suspended. When the boom ended in 2000, most of these companies collapsed. The conventional explanation is that their strategies were flawed. True, but irrelevant. During the boom, flawed strategies succeeded. During the bust, even sound strategies failed. The survivors weren't necessarily the best companies. They were the companies whose timing allowed them to become entrenched before the cycle turned. This is deeply uncomfortable because it suggests success is less about merit than about timing luck. And there is luck in timing, absolutely. But there's also skill. The person who recognizes they're in a favorable cycle and exploits it aggressively has skill. The person who recognizes an unfavorable cycle and conserves resources until it passes has skill. The person who mistakes the cycle they're in and acts inappropriately lacks skill, regardless of their strategic brilliance. Let me show you how timing operates in relationships and social dynamics, because this is where most people's timing is catastrophically bad. Think about how people handle conflicts in relationships. When anger is high and emotions are raw, people want to resolve things immediately. They want to talk it out right now, to reach understanding, to fix the problem. This is exactly the wrong timing. In moments of high emotion, people can't process information rationally. They're defensive, reactive, unable to see the other person's perspective. Attempts to resolve conflicts in this state almost always make things worse. The right timing is to pause, let emotions cool, then address the issue when both parties can think clearly. This requires patience and restraint that most people don't have. The pattern is universal in relationships. Asking for commitment too early destroys potential. Waiting too long creates missed opportunities. Addressing issues too quickly feels pushy. Waiting too long lets resentment build. Every significant relationship action has optimal timing that most people miss because they act based on their immediate feelings rather than strategic assessment of readiness. Sophisticated people in relationships develop timing awareness. They notice when their partner is stressed from work and know that's not the time to raise relationship issues. They recognize when connection is high and use those moments to discuss important topics. They sense when momentum is building toward deeper commitment and act to catalyze it. They read the relationship's rhythms and time their moves to those rhythms rather than their own impulses. This isn't manipulation. It's emotional intelligence applied to timing. The same conversation can either strengthen or damage a relationship depending entirely on when you have it. The same request can either be welcomed or resented based purely on timing. Understanding this and acting accordingly is maturity, not deception. Now let me take you into the physiology of timing, because there are biological rhythms that most people completely ignore but that dramatically affect outcomes. Humans have circadian rhythms that affect cognitive function, emotional regulation, and decision-making throughout the day. Most people are sharper mentally in late morning. Most people are more emotionally reactive in late evening. These patterns vary by individual but exist for everyone. Sophisticated operators time their important actions to their biological rhythms. They schedule difficult decisions for when their cognitive function peaks. They avoid important meetings when they know they'll be mentally foggy. They handle routine tasks during low-energy periods and reserve high-energy periods for high-stakes activities. This seems obvious, but almost no one does it systematically. The same principle applies to others' rhythms. If you need someone to make a favorable decision, you don't approach them when they're stressed, tired, or distracted. You wait for moments when they're energized, clear-headed, and open. This might mean waiting days or weeks for the right moment, but the payoff in terms of outcome probability is enormous. Organizations have rhythms too. End of quarter is terrible timing for proposing anything expensive because everyone is focused on hitting numbers. Beginning of fiscal year is often optimal because budgets are being allocated. Right after layoffs is terrible timing for asking for resources. Right after a major success is often optimal because confidence is high and resources feel abundant. Understanding these organizational rhythms and timing your moves accordingly multiplies your effectiveness. Let me show you how timing operates in negotiations, because this is where timing mastery becomes immediately practical. Every negotiation has phases, and different tactics work in different phases. Early in negotiation, extreme anchoring can be effective. Late in negotiation, it appears unreasonable and can blow up deals. Early in negotiation, walking away is posturing. Late in negotiation, it's genuine and forces decision. The sophisticated negotiator recognizes which phase the negotiation is in and adjusts tactics accordingly. They don't use the same approach throughout. They read momentum, recognize when progress has stalled, sense when the other party is ready to close. This temporal awareness allows them to apply pressure when it will move things forward and ease off when pressure would create resistance. Timing in negotiation also involves knowing when to negotiate at all. The worst time to negotiate is when you desperately need the deal. Your desperation shows and destroys your leverage. The best time to negotiate is when you have alternatives in time. This means the strategic move is often to create alternatives and build time cushion before negotiating, even if that delays potential gains. The improved timing more than compensates for the delay. You see this in employment negotiations. The person who interviews while employed negotiates from strength. The person who interviews while unemployed negotiates from weakness, even if their skills are identical. The timing of when you're in the market determines your leverage more than your capabilities. Understanding this means planning career moves from positions of strength rather than waiting until you're forced to move from positions of weakness. Now let me take you into how timing operates in learning and skill development, because this is where timing is most overlooked but potentially most valuable. Skills have optimal timing for learning. Some skills are easier to learn young. Some skills require maturity to understand. Some skills build on foundations that must be in place first. Trying to learn things in the wrong order or at the wrong life stage wastes enormous effort. Think about language learning. Children absorb languages effortlessly. Adults struggle. The optimal timing for learning multiple languages is childhood, but most people don't have that option. Understanding this doesn't change the past, but it does suggest that if you have children, the timing for exposing them to languages is early, not later when it seems more practical. Or consider leadership skills. You can read about leadership young, but you can't really understand it until you've experienced followership and seen how bad leadership affects you. The optimal timing for learning leadership is after you've been led, both well and poorly. Before that, the lessons don't connect to experience and don't stick. This suggests that life has optimal sequencing. Some things should be learned early. Some things can only be learned late. Some things require foundational experiences before the learning makes sense. Understanding this sequencing and pursuing development in the right order multiplies learning effectiveness compared to random or purely opportunistic skill acquisition. The same applies to career moves. There's optimal timing for taking on stretch assignments, for changing companies, for shifting industries, for starting businesses. Too early, and you lack the foundation. Too late, and you've missed the window of maximum impact. Reading your own development arc and timing major moves to that arc rather than to external opportunities is sophisticated career strategy that most people never practice. Let me show you how timing operates in cultural and historical contexts, because the largest timing patterns operate at scales most people never consider. Societies have cycles of expansion and contraction, liberalism and conservatism, optimism and pessimism, risk-seeking and risk aversion. These cycles typically run 20 to 30 years, longer than most people's strategic planning horizon but shorter than a lifetime. Understanding where society is in these cycles helps you time major life decisions. Starting a business during an expansion cycle is easier than during contraction. Pursuing unconventional paths is more socially acceptable during liberal phases than conservative ones. Making risky career moves works better when society is optimistic and risk-seeking than when it's pessimistic and risk-averse. This doesn't mean you should only act during favorable cycles. It means you should understand which cycle you're in and adjust your strategy accordingly. If you start a business during a contraction cycle, you know it will be harder and plan accordingly. You bootstrap rather than relying on easy funding. You focus on profitability rather than growth. You build for the recovery that will eventually come rather than for immediate expansion. The people who build lasting success often do it by timing to these large cycles. They build conservatively during boom times when everyone else is aggressive, positioning themselves to survive the inevitable bust. They invest aggressively during bust times when everyone else is terrified, positioning themselves to capture the recovery. They're out of sync with the crowd, which feels uncomfortable but produces superior outcomes. Warren Buffett's famous advice to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful is purely about timing to cycles. The advice has no content about what to buy or sell. It's entirely about when to act relative to collective psychology. This timing discipline is arguably more important than his stock-picking ability in explaining his success. Now let me take you into the relationship between timing and patience, because this is where most people fail. Mastering timing requires patience that most people lack. You must be willing to wait, sometimes for years, for conditions to align. You must be able to recognize that conditions aren't right and hold off on actions you're eager to take. You must resist the pressure to act just because you're ready, understanding that your readiness doesn't determine optimal timing. This patience is agonizing. You see opportunities you want to pursue. You have strategies you want to execute. You have ambitions you want to achieve. But timing says not yet. So you wait. And while you wait, others act. They seem to be making progress while you're standing still. The pressure to abandon timing discipline and just do something is intense. This is where most people break. They can't stand the inaction. They convince themselves that timing doesn't matter as much as they thought, that they can make any timing work through effort and skill, that waiting longer will just mean missed opportunities. So they act prematurely. And usually, they fail or achieve suboptimal outcomes that they blame on execution or strategy when the real problem was timing. The masters wait. They develop projects that could launch but don't launch them. They build capabilities they don't yet deploy. They establish relationships they don't yet leverage. They're prepared to act but waiting for the right moment. When that moment comes, they strike with speed and force that seems sudden to observers but is actually the release of long-accumulated preparation. Think about how this operated in Bismarck's unification of Germany. He spent 3 years preparing, building military strength, establishing diplomatic positions, studying opponents. To observers, he wasn't doing much. Behind the scenes, he was preparing for moments he knew would come. When those moments arrived, he moved with decisive speed. The preparation made the speed possible. The patience made the preparation possible. This is the paradox of timing mastery. It requires both patience and speed. Patience to wait for the right moment. Speed to act decisively when that moment arrives. Most people get this backwards. They act quickly without waiting for timing to be right. Then when the right moment arrives, they're exhausted or committed elsewhere and can't capitalize on it. Let me show you how timing operates in communication and persuasion, because the same message delivered at different times produces completely different effects. Think about how leaders communicate during crises. If they speak too soon, before they have information or solutions, they appear panicked and incompetent. If they speak too late, after anxiety has built, they appear detached and uncaring. There's a window of optimal timing where communication relieves anxiety without appearing reactive. Great leaders sense this window. They gather information quickly, formulate response, then communicate at exactly the moment when people are ready to hear from them. Not so early that they have nothing useful to say. Not so late that silence has created narratives they must overcome. The timing of the communication matters as much as the content. The same applies to persuasion. If you try to persuade someone who's not ready to hear your message, you create resistance that makes future persuasion harder. If you wait until they're already convinced, you miss the opportunity to influence. There's a window when they're open but not decided, when your input can actually shape their thinking. Hitting that window requires reading their decision process and timing your intervention perfectly. Sophisticated persuaders don't argue persistently. They plant seeds, then wait for timing to ripen those seeds. They return to the topic when circumstances have shifted and the person is more receptive. They recognize that persuasion is often a multi-touch process where timing of each touch matters more than the force of any individual argument. This completely contradicts how most people approach persuasion. They believe more argument equals more persuasion. They push harder when they meet resistance. They return to the topic immediately after being rebuffed. All of this creates more resistance and makes persuasion less likely. Understanding timing means recognizing when to push and when to pause, when to advance and when to retreat, when to speak and when to remain silent. Now let me take you into how timing operates with momentum and how momentum itself creates timing opportunities. Momentum is powerful but temporary. When you have momentum, good timing means pressing your advantage aggressively. When you lack momentum, good timing means conserving resources and waiting for momentum to build. Most people do the opposite. Think about how this operates in sports. A team that has momentum should be aggressive, take risks, push their advantage because momentum makes risky moves more likely to succeed. A team that has lost momentum should be conservative, reset, rebuild confidence because aggressive moves without momentum usually fail and drain confidence further. Good coaches understand this and adjust their strategy based on momentum, not just score or capabilities. The same applies everywhere. A startup with momentum should expand aggressively because momentum attracts talent, funding, and customers. A startup without momentum should focus on fundamentals and rebuild momentum before expanding. A career with momentum should pursue ambitious opportunities because momentum makes them achievable. A career without momentum should focus on execution and rebuilding credibility before pursuing ambitious moves. The critical skill is reading whether you have momentum and timing your aggression or conservatism accordingly. Most people either never become aggressive, missing momentum when they have it, or stay aggressive constantly, exhausting themselves during periods when conservation would be wiser. Neither pattern works. You must be able to shift between modes based on momentum state. Momentum has self-reinforcing properties that make timing critical. When you have momentum, success becomes easier, which creates more success, which builds more momentum. This creates windows of accelerating returns where aggressive action compounds rapidly. Miss the window by being too conservative, and the momentum fades before you fully capitalize. Catch the window with aggressive action, and you achieve in months what might take years without momentum. But momentum also makes eventual failure more catastrophic. The same dynamics that amplify success during momentum amplify failure when momentum reverses. This is why timing includes knowing when to lock in gains, when to get conservative, when to protect what you've built rather than continuing to press. The optimal timing is maximum aggression while momentum builds, then consolidation as momentum peaks, then conservation as momentum fades. Most people miss all three phases. They're too conservative during building momentum, missing the opportunity. They're too aggressive at peak momentum, setting up catastrophic reversals. And they're too aggressive during fading momentum, turning manageable setbacks into disasters. Reading momentum phase and timing actions appropriately is how you ride momentum to large gains without being destroyed by its reversal. Let me show you how timing operates with information and when to act on incomplete information. One timing mistake is waiting for perfect information before acting. Perfect information never comes, and by the time you have high certainty, opportunity has passed. The other extreme is acting on minimal information, which often leads to failure. The skill is knowing how much information is enough given the situation. High-stakes, irreversible decisions require more information and therefore more time. Low-stakes, reversible decisions require less information and should be made quickly. Most people get this backwards. They agonize over trivial decisions that don't matter while making major decisions impulsively. Understanding the stakes helps you time your decision-making appropriately. There's also strategic value in moving before information is complete. If you wait for certainty, so does everyone else. If you act on strong probability before certainty, you move ahead of the crowd. This is risky, but the risk premium can be enormous. The entrepreneur who launches before the market is proven takes risk but can capture the entire market if they're right. The entrepreneur who waits for proof faces lower risk but splits a crowded market with many competitors. This suggests different timing strategies for different risk profiles. If you can afford to fail, moving early on incomplete information often makes sense because the upside of being early is huge. If you can't afford to fail, waiting for more information makes sense even though it means lower upside if you're right. Understanding your risk capacity and timing decisions accordingly is sophisticated strategy. Now let me address the most difficult aspect of timing: how to maintain timing discipline in the face of social pressure. When everyone around you is acting, when the crowd is moving, when opportunities seem to be vanishing, the pressure to abandon timing discipline and join the rush is overwhelming. Every instinct screams at you to act now before it's too late. This is usually exactly the wrong timing. Moments when everyone is rushing in are typically moments when conditions are least favorable. The asset is overvalued. The opportunity is oversaturated. The cycle is peaking. The optimal timing was earlier, before the rush. Now the optimal timing is to wait for the crowd to disperse and conditions to reset. Maintaining timing discipline during these moments requires extraordinary psychological strength. You must be willing to seem foolish, to appear to be missing out, to endure others' success while you wait. You must trust your timing analysis over your social instincts. You must be able to stand apart from the crowd when every fiber of your being wants to join it. The people who master timing are often contrarians, but not contrarians who oppose the crowd on principle. They're contrarians who understand crowd behavior and time their actions opposite to the crowd because they know crowd timing is systematically bad. They buy when everyone is selling. They sell when everyone is buying. They act when everyone is waiting. They wait when everyone is acting. This contrarian timing feels unnatural because it requires acting against your social instincts. You're doing the opposite of what the group is doing, which triggers anxiety and doubt. But this is precisely why contrarian timing works. If it felt comfortable, everyone would do it, which would eliminate the advantage. The psychological difficulty of contrarian timing is the source of its effectiveness. Let me give you one final extended case study that shows timing operating at the highest level. In 1997, Jeff Bezos had grown Amazon to significant size but was facing a decision. The internet boom was building. He could go public immediately and capture huge valuations in the euphoric market. Or he could wait, continue building the business, and go public later when the business was more mature. Conventional wisdom said go public immediately. The market was hot. Valuations were high. Delay meant risking a market turn. Every incentive and every advisor pushed for immediate IPO. But Bezos had a different timing analysis. He understood that Amazon needed more development before it could handle public market pressure. Going public too early would force short-term thinking that could damage long-term potential. He went public in mid-1997, but conservatively. He raised only $54 million when he could have raised much more. He was explicit that Amazon was a long-term bet that would lose money for years. He essentially told public markets to stay away if they wanted short-term profits. This timing was perfect. He went public late enough that the business was sustainable but early enough to capture boom-era capital. Then when the internet bubble burst in 2000, Amazon survived because Bezos had timed the IPO to give the company enough capital to weather the crash, but had also set expectations low enough that the stock could fall 80% without destroying the company. Companies that went public at peak valuations with high expectations collapsed. Amazon went public with modest valuations and low expectations and survived. This is timing mastery at a strategic level. Bezos could have gone public earlier and captured higher valuations. He could have gone public later and had a more mature business. Instead, he timed it to maximize long-term survival and growth rather than short-term valuation. He read the cycle, understood where it was heading, and positioned for the conditions he knew were coming rather than the conditions that currently existed. 25 years later, Amazon is worth over $1 trillion. Much of that success comes from technical innovation, operational excellence, and strategic expansion. But the foundation was the timing of that IPO, going public at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way to capture capital while maintaining strategic flexibility through the crash that destroyed most dot-com companies. So as we close this deep exploration of Law 35, understand that timing is not luck. It's perception. It's reading the rhythms and patterns that govern systems. It's understanding cycles, momentum, readiness, and windows of opportunity. It's developing patience to wait for right moments and decisiveness to act when those moments arrive. You're living in multiple timing contexts simultaneously. Personal biological rhythms. Relationship phases. Career stages. Organizational cycles. Industry dynamics. Economic cycles. Cultural shifts. Each operates on its own timeline with its own rhythms. Mastering timing means reading all these layers simultaneously and acting when they align favorably rather than acting based on your readiness alone. Master the art of timing. Not by trying to act at the perfect moment, because perfect moments are rare. But by refusing to act at obviously wrong moments. By developing patience to wait through unfavorable conditions. By maintaining readiness to act when conditions shift. By reading the patterns that most people miss because they're too focused on immediate circumstances. Timing determines everything. The same strategy succeeds or fails based on when you execute it. The same person rises or falls based on when they make their moves. The same action produces triumph or disaster based purely on timing. Understanding this is uncomfortable because it reduces your control. You can control your actions but not the timing contexts in which those actions occur. But awareness of what you can't control allows you to optimize what you can, the decision of when to act and when to wait. That's Law 35. That's how power flows with time rather than fighting against it. That's how masters achieve impossible things by acting at the moment when impossible becomes possible. That's everything.